It's Super Bowl Sunday, but not at this bar in Montreal. The Dieu du Ciel pub is pulling the plug on the most American sporting event there is.
With
the Trump administration bullying us, says founder Jean-François Gravel, it just didn't feel right to show the game. One of the many acts of protest against what's been called a betrayal, even an attack.
At the end of the day, many people are saying, we don't want to be American.
We Canadians want to stay Canadian, eh?
We get to see the maple trees, maple sugar on the maple leaves. We get the biggest wheat fields growing tall. In Canada, where we see the reversing falls. In Canada, we get to see them all.
Well, since Canada hit back last week and announced our own retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., the mango moron has seemingly backed down, but the threat still hasn't passed, and the turd still intends to exert pressure on Canada, threatening to grab us by the economy and assault us by annexation. And while many brush off his threat as just more posturing and chest beating from the felonious orangutan, others have taken his remarks more seriously, including our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who was caught on a hot mic at last week's economic summit saying as much.
He addressed hundreds of business, labor, and policy experts this morning in Toronto, vowing to bring free trade across Canada. But it was his comments behind closed doors that are garnering the most attention.
Excellent. I suggest that not only the Trump administration know how critical and maybe part of why they keep talking about absorbing us and making us very dangerous. They're very aware of what we have, and they very much want to benefit. But
money has gone to border protection, and the fentanyl thing is it's a minor thing from Canada, but we're still working to make sure that it goes away as best we can. But at the end of the day, everybody believes, and I think it's been very clear, that in order for Mr. Trump to be able to put in the tariffs, he needed to be able to say there was a threat to the United States. That comes in the form of fentanyl and border protection. And so it is a distraction. It is something that needs to be dealt with, but it's a distraction from what he really then talks about, which is access to our resources and access to having Canada be part of the United States.
And meanwhile, Trump-adjacent goons and scumbag convicts like Steve Bathtub Gin Bannon try to pressure us with their gaslighting and passive aggression, trying to wear us down and to deceive Americans into believing this is in their best interests.
Canada's greatest defense is about to become your softest underbelly. The north of Canada, that open border with whatever climate changes, but the beginning of the Northwest Passage, but more importantly, China and Russia, the great powers, and the United States, fighting it out over the Arctic with the vast resources of the Arctic is going to be the new great game of the 21st century. Canada, you are thrust into the middle of that, and quite frankly, you are the greatest, I don't know if target or prize. You're like asking, you're the great prize of that. As you awaken, and the geoeconomically, he's saying, hey, the United States market's so lucrative, you're going to have to pay a premium to get through the golden door, right? Canada could be all part of that. The geoeconomics of North America combined, and the geostrategic interest of North America combined, and particularly hemispheric defense, all the way from Argentina and Brazil under Bolsonaro, all the way up to the Canadian Arctic, is what the first half of the 21st century is going to be about. Trump is laying this out in a very sophisticated way, and avant-garde thinkers strategically and economically are coming and say, this guy's onto something. If you're part of that market, which is what I think he's talking about in making you a state or agreeing with you as a state, then you're inside the golden door.
Well, so far, attempts to rattle Canadian leaders have backfired, and with a couple of notable exceptions. And our provincial ministers have been standing united in their position that we will never become a 51st state or territory.
And the message I want to send to Canadians is this country is strong. Don't screw with us. We will come out ahead.
What I've learned from dealing with the President Trump's administration is we always have to take him seriously. And in that sense, I've been clear, we're the American people best friend, but we will never be a state and we will never be a colony.
We must respond as we are experiencing mimetic warfare. If we as Canadians are able to actually understand that the goods that we create will be bought because other countries are experiencing the same challenges, we will open markets. We will have goods that they want. And so as we have these conversations, I think it's great that the premiers are actually finally talking about removing provincial trade barriers. But this is one very small step in a way for us to be able to create real wealth and prosperity in this country. Canadians are 25% poorer than the Americans. We are now 20% poorer than the Australians. We are 20% poorer than the Danes. So it's not socialism, it's not capitalism, and it's not a resource curse. We have to get our shit together and figure out what the world wants and sell it.
Rubbing salt in the wounds, there's products with Canada as the 51st state are being sold on Amazon, even as they're threatening to close their operations in Quebec, costing hundreds of jobs. Irish musician and founder of Band Aid, Bob Geldof, was in Toronto last week for the opening night of his musical Just for One Day, about the 1984 concert for African famine relief, and he had his characteristically blunt remarks about our situation.
If Donald Trump thinks he's going to take on China, Canada, Mexico and Europe economically, I wouldn't bet on Donald Trump very much.
Ask Sir Bob Geldof what he thinks of U.S. President Donald Trump, and he doesn't hold back.
This bloviating, bloated orange ball of narcissism and greed.
And Canadians continue to fight back as consumers. We're committed to buying Canadian products and services, and some are selling their homes in Florida or cancelling their travel plans. Premiers are working to remove interprovincial trade barriers, and there have been renewed discussions about made in Canada energy solutions and pipelines, but that could prove to be more difficult. And we're also taking this opportunity to explore other oil and gas markets like Japan.
Recently, the U.S. has hinted at new tariffs on Canadian energy products, sending a wave of concern through Canada's energy sector. The possibility of higher taxes on oil and gas exports has put pressure on Canadian leaders to rethink their trade strategy and look for new buyers outside of North America. With tensions rising, Canada has been eyeing Asia, specifically Japan, as a promising alternative market. The Asia-Pacific region's demand for energy is soaring, and Japan, as one of the world's top buyers of liquefied natural gas, LNG, is in constant need of new suppliers. In 2023, Japan imported about 66 million tons of LNG, second only to China. On top of that, Canada's LNG is known for being 40% less carbon-intensive than U.S. LNG, making it a more attractive option for countries focused on reducing emissions. Recognizing this potential, Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, has been actively building energy ties with Japan. During a recent visit to Tokyo, she met with key industry players, including JERA, Japan's largest LNG buyer.
So how would U.S. annexing Canada as a sovereign country and part of the British Commonwealth even happen? There has been a historical precedent of the U.S. doing just that in places like Hawaii.
Historically, there are basically 5 ways to annex your neighbor. The most popular one is conquest. Roll in the tanks, roll in the troops, conquer territory, and claim it for your own. Most of history is the story of annexation through conquest, and the United States has been really, really good at doing this. Second approach is simply just planting the flag. The United States made a law about this. It allows any American citizen to plant the flag and claim for the United States any territory that is otherwise unclaimed or uninhabited. The third approach is coup d'etat and then gradual annexation. This is what happened in Hawaii. In 1893, Sanford Dole, the guy from the pineapple and the sticker on your banana, did a coup d'etat against Liliuokalani, the Queen of Hawaii. And after that, Hawaii became its own independent republic and eventually a territory of the United States. And by 1959, it became a state in the American Union proper. Fourth way to annex your neighbor is through purchase. One country buying the territory from another. I can't think of many countries in the world today that would voluntarily give up their sovereignty. So how would Donald Trump go about annexing Canada? Well, in his words, he would use economic force to get rid of the border between the two countries.
Economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something.
Does anybody know what that means? No. But Canadians need to take this really, really seriously.
Since Canada already has a head of state, the British monarch, can King Charles step in to prevent absorption by the U.S.? Well, according to Robert Hazell, professor of government and the Constitution at University College in London, it would have to come at the request of Canada.
And so it's just conceivable that the Canadian government might plead with him, because it's known that Trump is very impressed by the royal family. The Canadian government might plead with him to make some kind of intervention. I think the palace would act very cautiously, but if any intervention were made, it would be on the advice of the government of Canada.
Well, you're going exactly expertly where I was hoping to go, which is that this is actually, the King's involvement is actually one of the few cards that the Canadians have they could conceivably play beyond their aggressive response on tariffs themselves.
The Canadian Armed Forces is committed to reaching its NATO spending goals and has been accelerating its efforts to increase spending at home, including building and improving military housing on bases and relaxing some rules in order to increase numbers of recruitment.
Do you think that it is possible to accelerate, in your view, the target, for the sort of timeline, rather, for reaching the NATO target, which is now set out to 2032? Do you think Canada could do it faster?
It's absolutely possible, and this is what we have been working on since I've come on board. Like with the announcement of the 2% GDP by 2032, we have conducted an analysis to ensure that we could bring in capabilities and the spending earlier. Why? Because the longer we wait, the less we can get for the same amount of money.
We are looking at 6,500 as a target this year, plus or minus 4 or 5. And we are currently above the 5,000 mark, and with a lot of other files ready to be processed as well. Attention deficit, anxiety, asthma, and allergies are the four big A's. Whereas before, like immediately if you showed up with some kind of allergy, you were immediately taken off of the road, the path of being a potential candidate. Nowadays, with the technology available to us, that might not be the case unless you have a very, very severe case of allergy that within the trade or operational fields that you are choosing, you may not have access to the medical support to allow you to proceed.
In their ass-kissing attempt to appease the shit given over his border concerns, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith and leader of the Con Party, PP Pierre Pipsqueak Poilievre, have called for sending our troops to the border. And this is an unnecessary and alarmist position. While we have beefed up our budget and have assigned 35% more RCMP personnel, as well as conservation officers to the border, Canada's Minister of National Defence, Bill Blair, says there is no plan to deploy troops. We are not in conflict.
I don't think escalating that conversation at this point in time is productive. We are in a pause, and we are going to live up to the obligations that we have made to the Americans about policing, doing a better job of policing our border. We are not deploying the Canadian Armed Forces to our border. It's not what's required. Frankly, that is a border that doesn't require defense. We're not in any conflict with the United States. We have to police that border more effectively. We have to make sure that illicit drugs, illegal migration, organized crime are not operating on both sides of that border, and it means that we're going to support the policing community to do that job, including CBSA. The deployment of troops, it raises the question for both sides of the border. What would our troops do at that border? Because we don't have to defend it, we have to police it. And so we're sending the police, and we're going to support the police in doing their important job.
But for now, While Canada works on building up its military, we can count on our second line of defense, Canadian hockey players.